Check. Well, if I would have remembered my iPod, I would play the song "You Talk Too Much." Anybody remember that one from the 50s? You talk about people that you don't know. You talk about people wherever you go. Yeah, but I forgot my iPod, so you're out of luck. Some other time. Let's have a word of prayer, then we'll see about many words. Silently first, let's examine ourselves and get in fellowship. Father, protect people that are still on their way and clear our minds so we can focus and digest your eternal word. In Christ's name, amen. All right, the first paragraph of Ecclesiastes 5 has to do with going to the house of God. And although this is not a sacred building, this is still the family of God wherever believers meet together. 1 Timothy talks about behaving yourself in the household of God, which allows for the fact that there are no sacred buildings in the church age, but we nonetheless are coming together as family to honor the Lord. And basically the warning is don't say too much. Verse 2, don't be hasty in word. Don't make a vow that you can't keep and then back off on it and say it was a mistake. Well, I didn't really mean that. Verse 6. And finally, verse 7. In many dreams and many words there is emptiness. The more you say, the less it means, is what I read in the Living Bible. Now, we continue, we'll come back to this. There's more to say about the quantity of our speech in Ecclesiastes, but first he deals again with the issue of riches. And remember, this is coming from the richest man who ever lived. He had unlimited resources. And, well, even before money, he says there's injustice. Verse 8, if you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province. Now, we all know, and some of us have experienced injustice in the world. It's not fair. Why doesn't the government do something? Or why doesn't somebody do something? He said, don't be shocked. Why? Because these officials are in office, well, we're going to see in a minute, to feather their own nest, but the other thing is they're all trying to please the guy above them. I worked for a certain company as a contractor, and I got fed up dealing with them because I realized that everybody is trying to kiss up to somebody higher up. And so it's not about doing business fairly. It's about how can I look good to my boss who has to answer to his boss, and up it goes. And so it's just a whole culture of kiss up and trying to please people and doing lip service and eye service. And he says, don't be shocked. You know, this guy's looking at this guy and this guy's looking at this guy. So they're not looking at justice. They're looking at how to get a promotion, how to look good in the eyes of the boss, how to get recognition from the corporation. There are higher officials still over them. And the New Living Bible, you have it. Lana is a regular reader of the New Living Translation. Read the last phrase of verse 8 in the New Living Bible, dear. Verse 8. Yeah, I think. And you know how that it is. You realize in our country, there was a time when you could go to the White House and talk to the president. Now try that sometime. Not going to happen. Why? Because the bureaucracy has become so immense that nobody's accessible. And the capstone of the whole statement is verse 9. Basically, they're all feathering their own nest all the way to the top. The king, the highest official in government, is cultivating the field. Now, depending on which translation you read, mine seems to lean the other way, but I read several other translations, and basically the king is doing what he does to his own advantage. I mean, we use the term public servant. Come on, who are we kidding? Self-servant. By the way, if you can't tell, this is an extremely difficult book to teach and to master. And it is compounded by the fact that I don't know Hebrew, but it appears that a lot of the Hebrew is obscure because there's considerable variation from one translation to the other. You go in most parts of the Bible, you can open up five translations, and pretty much they're all saying the same thing with very minor details. But in Ecclesiastes, there's considerable variation. And actually, I discovered that the most effective way for me to study this book, I've read lots of commentaries, and I've only found a couple that are very useful on it. But the best way I've found to study this book, and I've used this in other passages of Scripture, go on BibleGateway.com. And there is a little symbol that looks like a transformer. But what it is it means parallel. And you click on parallel, and it opens up another column, and then you can choose a translation. So, for example, this morning in studying these passages, I was looking at, as I mentioned, the New Living Translation. I was looking at the Bible I teach from, which is the New American Standard. I think I had the NIV open, and I had the Holman, which is actually a published publication of the Southern Baptist, was a very good translation. The Holman, what is it called? Holman something, HCSB or something. But anyway, the Holman Bible, Holman. And I was reading this in 4 translations, side by side. And there is some variation, but it also is eye-opening because sometimes one translation doesn't make it as clear as the next one. And you know I don't believe there's any perfect translation. I don't subscribe to the idea that if the King James was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for us. King James is still, there are people that believe that. You know, that's a whole, it's almost a cult. It's not really a cult because these people are born again and they believe the Bible is the Word of God and they're theologically straight, but that somebody got this crazy idea that the King James Version is an inspired translation. No translation is inspired. They are all done by man, and they are as good as the people that translate them. And the King James Bible was translated by the best scholars from Cambridge and Oxford under the orders of King James finished in 1611. So use the translations, they're tools. We all know working on mechanical things, sometimes you can't get it with one type. Maybe you can't get it with a socket, and so you use a box end. And you can't get it with a box end wrench, and so then you get a hammer, you know. Whatever it takes. So with that in view, use your computer or invest in a couple other translations, and we will often compare. If I'm reading from the New American Standard and she's over on the other side of the room reading the New Living Bible, I say, well, tell me what your Bible, how does your Bible translate that? Okay. Yes. Yeah. And it could be because, like, my translation seems to say the king cultivating the field is an advantage, but a number of translations says the king translating the field is to his advantage. And I'm not prolific in Hebrew, so I can't tell you. I'm at the mercy of the translators. And so you kind of look at them and you kind of average it, you know. What this guy says, you go with, you know, the majority opinion if they're all reliable translations. But this one, the next one, there's absolutely nothing gets lost in translation. And of course, this is repeated throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. And the classic quotation, when somebody asked John D. Rockefeller, who early in his life was a billionaire, and this is back when a billionaire was a lot bigger deal than a billionaire is today. He was the richest man in the world, first man to become a billionaire. And somebody said, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? Because he was just pouring himself into his oil business and making money hand over fist. He was making $1 million a day, and how much is enough? And he said, a little bit more. You know, the good side of John D. Rockefeller that you don't often hear is he eventually faced this, and he began giving his money away. And he actually made massive contributions to good causes. What I mean good causes, a number of Baptist ministries and organizations were the beneficiaries of some of these gifts that Rockefeller, now I don't know if the man ever became a believer, but at least he was giving them to good Christian organizations, but money will never satisfy. And generally speaking, as you get more, it becomes more important, and you become more stressed about it, but you'll never be satisfied. And the truth that consistently rings through Ecclesiastes, the Sermon on the Mount, Hebrews 13, 1 Timothy 6, the key word is contentment. If you cannot be content with what you have, you will not be content with more. You will be less content. He who loves abundance will never be, implied, he who loves abundance will never be satisfied with its income. You will never feel that you have enough. And it is interesting. You can watch even with children and grandchildren, whether it's money or toys or anything, they start to get a little, and immediately there's a desire to have more, and they want to begin to build. And remember, the scripture clearly warns against accumulating money for the sake of accumulation. If you have a purpose, if you're saving for a new car, if you're saving for a new house, if you're saving for retirement, that's legitimate. If you're saving for a specific need. But if you are accumulating just to accumulate, because that's what it means in Matthew chapter 6, verse 20, where it says, 6:19 and 20, lay not up treasures for yourself on earth. And the laying up is the vertical accumulation. You're not supposed to do it this way. You're supposed to do it this way. When you get it, use it. It's not to accumulate. It's not to hoard. All right. When good things increase, you've probably watched some of these TV shows about people that win the lottery. There's one on the, what is that, DYI, the home channel, where they have a program of people, what they buy when they win the lottery. And those shows don't bring it out, but I've seen other shows that really bring out that many people's lives really go downhill when they win the lottery. When good things increase, so do those that consume them. One of the stories I watched, and I think it was repeated in more than one person's life, is they won the lottery and immediately attracted friends that were sleazeballs. And in one case, the person that won the lottery had this person become their best friend and treat him well and do all these things for him with the ulterior motive of getting money, and ended up killing the person that won the lottery with the intent of getting all their money. So when you have money, you have more friends, but they're not always good friends. And you have all these people with all these scams and all these schemes. Nothing will get rid of a telephone salesperson faster than saying, I don't have any money, Nothing will get rid of a bill collector. I don't have any money. In fact, I wish I could quote my brother-in-law, because he has a very good line for bill collectors, but you can't say it in church, so you have to ask me privately. When good things increase, so do those who consume them. And that also goes to legitimate. There just seems to be, as you get more stuff, you have to have more stuff to protect the stuff. You have to have more people. You have to have more security. You have to do this. And so life, as Solomon has warned, becomes depressingly complex. And he says the consumers increase. There's more things to gobble up your money, like taxes. So what's the advantage? And here's another one of these translations that's not 100% consistent. What is the advantage except for, my Bible says, except to look on, which is a little obscure. And here again, I defer to the New Living Translation. Lana, what does it say? See, she can't sleep today. Yeah, you can just, wow. You can't believe the bills that you have that gobble up all that money, and it just goes right through your fingers. Everybody's out there to get it. The government wants it. Your friends want it. Your relatives want it. Everybody's calling you saying, hey, can I have, What fun is that? Verse 12. The sleep of a working man is pleasant. Why? Because in many cases he's worked physically, and that's healthy. And you probably do sleep better after a hard day of physical work. You don't usually sleep well after a tough day mentally. The sleep of a working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much. The stomach of the rich man doesn't allow him to sleep. Now, the most literal understanding of that would be, overeating, and the guy has indigestion. But I think the full stomach could be understood figuratively. Why does the man who simply goes in, he puts in his time, he works hard, he works physically, he comes home, he goes to sleep. And the other guy, he's too worried. He's had to deal with all this money management, and he's worried about who's trying to get it and how can I preserve it. And so he has insomnia because of a complex life. More to worry about, more people bugging him. He has to have consultants and financial planners and attorneys and tax advisors. And the subtle message that comes through and periodically it surfaces, well, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Keep your life simple. Don't get overextended. Grievous evil which I've seen under the sun, riches hoarded. Matthew 6:19 again, don't hoard riches. Don't hoard wealth. Don't collect simply for the sake of collecting and accumulation. It's damaging. Because with this mentality follows greed. The more you get, the more greed. And what happens when you're greedy? Well, when it comes to money, you become greedy, and so you take unnecessary risks. Now, I know very little about investing, and I never give any counsel on finances because I'm not good at it. In fact, Lana and I have a byword that we live by. We always buy high and sell low. That's been the story of our life. We always pay top dollar, and we end up giving it away or selling it for ridiculous. She'll never let me forget the time David Kimple gave me his old Volkswagen. I burned it up, blew the head gasket. I figured nobody wants this car. I put it on eBay, or not eBay, Auto Trader, for I think $700. See what I mean? My phone was jammed the rest of the afternoon because I didn't realize how many people were willing to rebuild an engine on a 2000 Jetta, and I figured, heck, it's junk. It's not worth, how much can the car be worth? It's going to cost a couple thousand for a head gasket. People were begging, please don't sell that car. I'm on my way with cash. So I can't give you any financial advice, but I do know one thing, and I think any legitimate financial advisor would support me on this. So here's Investing 101. I'm confident of this, nothing else. Risk, how can I say this? High interest, high return equals high risk. Can I say it more clearly? High risk and but what I'm trying to say is the more return you want to get on your money, the bigger risk. See, I should have thought this through, but unfortunately I was preoccupied with other things. The more return you want on your money, the more risk you have to take. Does that make sense? And that's the pattern you have here. Here's a person who is greedy. He has plenty of money, but he's greedy, and so he wants the maximum return, and so he takes the maximum risk. Whenever something is promising 8%, when the market is typically delivering 2 or 3%, there is a lot of risk. All right? Bernie Madoff was offering these fabulous returns, but they were all imaginary. They didn't exist. And people will tell you that that was a very high-risk investment. So learn that. If you are greedy and you want a high rate of return, you are going to take very high risks. And that's what this person does. Here's a person, he's hoarding money. He has more than he needs, but he's still greedy. And so he puts this into some kind of he doesn't know it's a Ponzi scheme. He puts it into some sort of a high risk. By the way, church bonds will typically pay 2 and 3 times the going interest rate. I had somebody in the banking business say, we won't loan money to churches because they are such high risk. A lot of churches go on, you don't realize it. I mail to all the churches in South Florida, and you'd be surprised how often I have to go through and clean out my mailing list because these churches have folded. All right, high risk goes along with high return. So this guy does it, and what happens? He loses it. He loses it by what? And I think the new ASB in this case is hot on. It says a bad investment. Some Bibles will just say misfortune. But in the context, he's greedy. He takes the risk, and he loses it. And so he ends up with nothing to pass on to his children because of his greed. There was nothing to support him. And besides, he came naked from his mother's womb, and so he will return. That's in the New Testament also. The whole statement is, you can't take it with you. Job said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked I will return to dust. Fortunately, he had the right attitude. The Lord gave, the Lord taketh away. And you have the same thing in 1 Timothy 6. We brought nothing into this world. We can't take anything out. And so we accumulate wealth for what? Well, remember Solomon's concern. I will accumulate wealth and give it to an idiot. And that's exactly what Solomon did. All right. He says this is a grievous evil, that people will become so greedy that they risk their money and lose it. And the other thing is, they don't think about the fact that they're going to die, and they accumulate money like they're going to live forever. It's a grievous evil, verse 16. Exactly as a man is born, thus he will die. He will die with nothing. He was born with nothing. So what is the advantage of working yourself to death and not enjoying your life? And he says in verse 7, throughout his life, he also eats in darkness. He can't really see the forest for the trees, if you please. He can't see the big picture. We become so focused on the accumulation of wealth that we tend to lose touch with reality in other areas. And so he lives his life in darkness, sickness, and anger. So we get to one of Solomon's conclusion statements in verse 18. So what do you have left? What's left? What should I do? Well, remember that Solomon is writing from the perspective of under the sun. He's writing from the standpoint of human observation, but he's had a lot of experience. So he says, here's what I've seen. This doesn't really bring the divine viewpoint into the picture. You don't see anything in here about whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 6:19, I think it is. Or Philippians 1:21. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He's not living life on that level. Remember, he's writing about his experience as a man being out of fellowship, away from the Lord. And so this is almost like advice to an unbeliever, because it's not really bringing the divine factor into it. Without God in your life, although he mentions God, and part of it, a big step, is recognizing that whatever we have is a gift of God. We can enjoy things a lot more if we really understand their source from gifts from God, temporary gifts. It's really the principle of stewardship. God gives you money to use it and enjoy it, but each step of the way, recognize it's a gift from God. And I think God would bless us with a lot more if we really had that mentality. I didn't earn it. I don't deserve this. We have this entitlement mentality in America. Well, I have to have this, and I couldn't live without an iPhone, what is it, about 11 now? Let me show you my dumb phone sometime. I'll tell you what I think of smartphones. Well, I have to have this, and no, we don't have to have anything. We have food and raiment. Let's be content. Okay, so here's his conclusion. I've seen to be good and fitting. Where does he go? He consistently goes back to the most basic, simple things in life. Can you enjoy a meal? Sometimes we can't enjoy a meal because we're so worried about something. We may be worried about money or some deal we're trying to cook up. Did I say cook up? Yeah, to eat, to drink. Enjoy your work. I tried to tell my kids when they were young. First of all, I used to always play that song called Get a Job. I don't know if you remember that oldie. I drilled that into their head as soon as they could walk. Get a job. You know, sha-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Remember that one? Great song. Get a job. Get the paper and read it through and through. Okay. But the other thing I told them is get a job that you enjoy. Now that backfired on me, because my son worked for me. I thought I paid him handsomely. But he hated it. He quit, and he went to Nevada to work for BMW on motorcycles. So he took enjoy your work too seriously. He wasn't enjoying the AV business, so he got into some, well, really, better off. Better off to make less money doing what you enjoy than more money doing a job that you hate. Enjoy your labor. Do something that you enjoy, because it's part of the curse. You have to do it. That was laid on Adam and everybody since, especially men. Toil under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. That's his reward. He says that's what you're going to have left when push comes to shove. All your investments and all your status symbols, said your reward is basically going to be the enjoyment of what you have. He's going to say shortly, it's a lot more important to enjoy what you have than to anticipate and dream about what you don't have. So he says that's your reward. Furthermore, for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, did you notice that? Every once in a while you'll hear some preacher saying, wealth is evil, money is evil. No, God chooses, 1 Timothy 6:17, God charged them that are rich in this world not to be high-minded, nor trust in the uncertainty of riches, but to trust in God who gives us all things richly to enjoy. He's talking to rich people, and he says, God has given you those rich things to enjoy. Don't be conceited. Don't trust in your riches. Recognize they're a gift from God. James 1:17, every good gift and every perfect gift cometh down from above, from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So he says, that's what you have. For every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, well, more important than that is the ability to enjoy them. He has given the power to enjoy, to eat from them and receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. It is a gift from God. The point is, a lot of people with wealth cannot enjoy it. Primary reason, they're too busy trying to accumulate more wealth. If they would stop right where they are and enjoy it, they'd have a wonderful life. But no, I have to get more. And they don't often consider the years of his life. I think this is the idea of looking back, perhaps looking back with regret. You don't worry too much about the past or the future. You stay occupied with what you have. God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. Now he continues this until chapter 6. There's an evil, which I have seen, under the sun, and that is the thing that constantly stares us in the face in Ecclesiastes, and you have to keep that in the headline, in the foreground. I have seen, observation, life on earth, looking around me, not looking beyond the sun, not really looking up to God. Now, we believe Solomon came back, but this is most of the experience that he gathered when he was in midlife and out of fellowship. He says, this is another evil I have observed. It's prevalent among men. To a man whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing. He has everything that he wants, but he can't enjoy it. You'll read about people who love to go to restaurants, but they can't enjoy the food. I think it was Chuck Swindoll I heard talking about a guy that would always take him out to fancy restaurants, but he says, I can't taste any of it. His taste buds were shot. Guess that happens. The point is, you have to be able to enjoy it. You have to have the gift of good health. You have to be able to relax. Money can never bring happiness, and so you can be filthy rich and extremely unhappy because you don't have the capacity, and so somebody else ends up with your wealth. A foreigner enjoys them. He says this is affliction. The people that don't, that have the capacity to enjoy their riches, even though they have them. And he gives this sort of off-the-screen example. Here's a father who fathers 100 children. This is obviously hyperbole because he not only fathers, although I was talking to a guy who works with entertainers, and he was telling me about an entertainer, you've probably heard of him, Jackie Wilson from the 50s and 60s, fathered 50 children. I don't know how many women it took, but this guy fathers 100 children. This is imaginary. and lives many years. In fact, the context down is going to say 2,000 years. Well, the longest lifespan in history was 969. That belongs to Methuselah. Nobody's living 2,000. So we know this is a hyperbolic type of illustration. He has all these kids. He lives all these years. But if he's not satisfied with good things, and he doesn't have a... Well, let's first talk about satisfaction. Remember, that's the first song I played. I can't get no satisfaction because that fits Solomon's life to a T. And we're told in 1 Timothy 6, be content. Philippians 4:11, I have learned in every circumstance, no matter what, I have learned to be content. Hebrews 13:5, let your conversation be free of covetousness and be content with what you have. We'll look on more verses in contentment. That's the important thing. This person's never satisfied. He seemingly has it all. And then the proper burial. Why is that so important? Well, because your funeral says a lot about you. In fact, for some of us, I hope us, the only nice things that will ever be said about us will be at our funeral. And I'm not so sure about that. But the proper burial, some people don't even get the respect. I mean, the basest of criminals, remember at the time of the crucifixion of Christ, if you were a victim of crucifixion, in the vast majority of cases you were a criminal, and you weren't allowed to have a burial. They just threw your body out on the garbage dump, because a burial involves respect. And so he's saying this guy didn't have a good reputation. He didn't have respect. He had friends. He seemingly had everything else, but he wasn't satisfied with his life, and he wasn't really appreciated. And Solomon says, be better off just to be a miscarriage. Be better off not to be born than to live that kind of life and die. And sadly, the majority of people go through life that way. They don't leave anything that is even close to a legacy. They're not a blessing to anybody throughout their life. They're never satisfied. They just go through like ants on a tree. He says it's not worth it. He says, like the miscarriage, it goes into obscurity. Its name is covered with obscurity. It never sees the sun, never knows anything. What's the point? What's the worth? And he continues. If this other man lives 1,000 years twice, that's where I got the 2,000 years. That's why I believe this is a hypothetical illustration. He lives 1,000 years twice, 1,000 year times two, and he doesn't enjoy the good things. Do not all go to one place. Here again is a reminder, horizontal. All he sees is the grave. In Ecclesiastes, he's looking at life under the sun, life without God. What do I observe? Well, you don't observe anything beyond the grave. People go to a funeral and they think it's the terminus of life. That's it. Now, we know better because we have more revelation. We know that when a person dies, they leave behind an empty house, an empty shell, but the soul of an unbeliever goes to Hades. The soul and spirit of a believer, absent from the body, present with the Lord. But Solomon's not looking at that. He's looking under the sun. I have seen, and if you look at life on the basis of observation, no, you don't see heaven, you don't see hell, you don't see life after death. Unfortunately, much of our world looks at that way. Verse 7, all a man's labor is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. Now, what does he mean? He says everybody's got work to eat, and yet there's no satisfaction because we're not satisfied with that. We're too greedy. For what advantage does a wise man have over a fool? They both have to work to eat. What advantage does the poor man know how to walk before the living? In a sense, he's saying we're all in the same boat. And he's just reminding us to start by enjoying what you have. And it's summarized in verse 9. What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. Now, that's not talking about the lust of the eyes, because that's not a good thing, to be consumed by what we see. Everything that we want, we see. That leads to materialism. What the eye sees is better than what the soul desires. All right, again, I defer to the New Living Translation, Lana. 6:9. Very simple and excellent translation. Enjoy what you have rather than thinking about what you don't have. What's right out in front of you, that's reality. What the soul desires is often dreams and fantasy. He says this being caught up in dreams and fantasies and wishes and wants, this is futility and striving after wind. Verse 10, whatever exists has already been named. Remember, he started out the book by saying there's nothing new under the sun. We just do things over again. Yes, we refine technology, but a lot of this stuff has come and gone before us. But he takes it more than that. Whatever exists has already been named. A lot of translations will bring out the word determined. In other words, you really can't change things because it's all pretty much laid out. You're going to live, you're going to work, you're going to eat, you're going to get sick, you're going to get old, you're going to die. You're not really going to change that. It's already been determined. It is known what a man is. God obviously knows everything about us. Divine foreknowledge is a reality, and you can't argue it. You can't dispute with him who is stronger than he is. It's talking about God. I read in one book a quotation, and I wish I would have written it down, but I might remember a little bit. He was basically saying, how can you, I think it was C.S. Lewis, how can you argue with the one that gave you the ability to argue? How can you question with the one that gave you the ability to question? You can't dispute with God. That's where Job got into trouble. Even though Job was a righteous man and innocent of all charges, at the end of the book, he was rebuked because he started questioning God's wisdom in bringing this great difficulty into his life. You can't dispute with God. He's stronger than you are. And we're right back where we started, almost. When we started in chapter 5, it was about many words. There are many words which increase futility. Here again, I think the New Living does a better job on that. Go. 6:11. Pretty good, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to stop 5 minutes early, all right? I'm going to try. Too many words. We're all guilty of that. We say too much. I'm not a fan of texting. I'm a little bit of a fan of email, but there is a distinct advantage. You can just get your message, especially if you have a dumb phone. So awkward for me to text on my dumb phone, I abbreviate anything just to save the economy of having to hunt and pack. You see, you can say exactly what you need to say and no more. That's a good thing. You know, you get on a phone call and inevitably the conversation is going to go out in the weeds somewhere. With many words, less meaning. Verse 11. Many words increase futility, the emptiness. It just becomes that, empty words. What's the point? Again, often we talk too much. Yours truly being very guilty of it because I almost always go overtime, but I'm going to try to knock this off 5 minutes early to practice what I preach. Can't practice everything I preach, but I'm going to try this one. Who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his life? You can't really figure it out. We're told in Romans 11, God's ways are past finding out. He will spend them like a shadow. Remember, we're reading not only the richest man in the world, but we're probably reading the wisest man in the world on a human level. He says you can't figure it out. What's the point of all that? You give it to the Lord. Sometimes we try to reason things out, and you waste your time, and you reduce your quality of life by always trying to figure out why and what for and all of this. You know, the best answer I can give you, why is to glorify God. That's why we're here. That's why we live. That's why we save or die. Who can tell a man what will come after him under the sun? We just don't know. Okay, almost. 4 minutes early. I was probably in too much of a hurry. Yeah, the conclusion? Okay. This is her nickel, not mine now. I stopped early. Oh, evil, the wine. See, my translation doesn't have the wine, but I did cover it. But that's what he's referring to, undoubtedly. Keep going. Now, how many heard me cover that? Did you heard you don't look back with regret? Thank you, Sue. Well, I didn't use the same words, and I didn't bring the wine into it, but that's probably implied, because that was the beverage of choice. When you had dinner, they didn't drink water in the ancient world because the water was no good. I got to shut up. I said I was stopping. Too many words.